Okay, so I'm pretty sure everyone here has traveled or flew out, been on a plane, went through Homeland Security, all that, etc. And what do we normally use when to show our identification cards or in order for us to travel? What do we normally use? For some of us, we use passports. Others may use identification cards, driver's license. Now, if we were to fly out of the country, a passport is most likely needed. But if we were to fly out in state, you can easily take your identification card and your driver's license. That's what we normally use. Now, if we are probably familiar with at least or heard of the Real ID Act, if you haven't already, well, it's an act that established minimum security criteria for license insurance and production, and it forbids federal agencies from accepting driver's license and identity cards from states that do not satisfy those standards for certain reasons. For some people, this may not be a big deal, but for others, it may be a big deal. I personally chose this act because it kind of does hit home. Just a little background about it is for this Real ID Act, anybody can easily just apply for one as if it were a normal one. The only difference is that nowadays you do have to, for this Real ID Act, you do have to provide a little more information. Now, like I said, I chose this because for some this may be a big deal. When I mean for some, I mean people that are not U.S. citizens, and I have a lot of family members that are not U.S. citizens, so they won't be able to apply for this Real ID Act. And now this Real ID Act will be required now when you want to travel in state, fly out. That's the only ID that will be required. So you can't use your old one or the regular one, which you still can apply for that. But to fly out, Homeland Security will be requiring you to issue this Real ID in order to fly out. So now, in that case, my family members that are not US citizens, they won't be able to fly out to if they wanted to go somewhere out in the state, like South Carolina, New York, etc. They won't be able to fly out for those reasons because that will be a requirement now, and they won't be able to apply for this Real ID because of their US citizen, because they're not a US citizen. So that's kind of the reason why I chose this. But mainly I wanted to make this informational for everyone to be educated on how it was created and also what you have to do in order to apply for it and the risks that may come according to those people that oppose of this Real ID Act. So how this Real ID came to be. It was a 9/11 event which undoubtedly prompted the Congress to pass the Real ID Act in order to prohibit foreign nationals from falsely acquiring a driver's license in the United States. Now, this is primarily based on the fact that the hijackers from the 9/11 used fake identification cards and driver license to fly out to get on those planes, and that's when the tragic happened. So ever since that incident, if you guys are not familiar with the 9/11 that crashed into the twin towers, that's mainly why this Real ID Act came to be. Now, the Real ID Act was enacted in 2005, but it has been a long process till now. Finally, the deadline for the Real ID in order to travel was supposed to be October 2020, but if we all know, um, the COVID happened. So obviously now this deadline is furthermore ahead. So I believe it is now May 23, 2023. That's when the deadline is gonna um, require you to have in order to fly out. Now, anyone interested in applying for the Real ID driver license, you will need a proof of identity, which is your birth certificate or your passport or your permanent resident card or your foreign passport with an approved US citizen card. Also, you will need your proof of Social Security. You will also need proof of California resident. So if I personally, I would recommend everyone to have three of each item because knowing how the DMV is, they are very picky. They require so many things, and sometimes you would have to go back home and bring the right paperwork. So I would just recommend everyone to just bring a little bit of everything, if that makes sense. So now that there are people out there that actually oppose of this Real ID Act, they say that this Real ID Act actually requires, like I said, more information to apply, which kind of this information will be um, how do I say this? This will be more, they will use this information and store it. So it kind of gives hackers a higher chance of hacking your information. So they mentioned how such requirements may appear to provide additional security, but this is not the case. The act of requiring people to provide more information about yourself and then storing that information in the database creates new hazards. That's what people that oppose of this Real ID Act say could happen. Now, hackers are pretty smart, so they may be possible to be doing this, you know? So hackers and terrorists will be an easier time stealing our identities and governments and corporations, which will be to discriminate against us with the Real ID. Now, this is just a risk that those that do not agree with this Real ID Act may occur if you really want to think about it, if you want to apply for it, but this is mainly just for better homeland security. Now that you're familiar with the Real ID Act and why it was created, how you can apply for it, and the downside of getting it according to people, you can make your own choice on if you'd like to apply for the Real ID Act or not. It's your choice. You don't have to, but it will be a requirement now for those who would like to travel or fly out in state. So you won't be using your regular ID or anything like that. This is just to inform you how to apply for it, how it was created, and the risks that may come with it according to certain people. So you have your choice if you would like to apply for this Real ID Act or not. And yes, thank you for listening.